So what I want to do is to look at this in this context. Inside the mind of Lucy Letby, was she mad? Was she bad? Or was she evil? And I'm going to expand and unpack some of those terms during the evening. So my name's Steve Gaskin. I think looking down the list, I've done business with at least half of you, which is good, and a warm welcome back. That's really good. I very proudly was a Metropolitan Police DCI Detective Chief Inspector, and that gave me quite a lot of cred for this evening, because at that level I was a SIO, a Senior Investigating Officer, and responsible for the investigation of murder and serious crime. And I'm going to talk to you about, right at the end, a case that I've been investigating for some 23 years now, which has just come to fruition and is going to be a documentary on ITV. What do I do now? I have the privilege of working with my wife, Kate, and my 3 daughters. I spend quite a lot of time lecturing at universities and indeed sixth forms now for A-level psychology, because offender profiling is on the curriculum and I've used that. And latterly, I've been lecturing at the Metropolitan Police Detective Training School, which is exciting. And TV and radio crime pundit. I'm going to show you some stuff that I've done, not to make me look big-headed, but some of it I think you may find interesting. And this was the last thing that I did, quite a big program this was, and it was done in absolute freezing cold. It was on Channel 5, you can access it. It was called Wayne Couzens' Killer in Plain Sight, and I was asked to talk about the psychology behind that. And in fact, we're thinking of casting a visiting order to Wayne Couzens to ask him why he did it, because no one knows, and no one knows why Lucy Letby did it. And I'll show you where that evidence. It's the same with Harold Shipman, and it's the same with Beverly Aylett. You know, I defy anyone to tell me why they did it, and if they do know, please let me know. So this is all about you guys, me imparting as much as I can for this. So I just want to get this top thing so you can see this out of the way. So what we're doing this evening, an insight into her personality, possible motives, and we're going to have a holistic examination of the case. So we're going to bring in as many facets as we can in the time allotted. And I will say yet a further thanks. Here we are. It's bank holiday weekend and you've given your time up to come along to this. We're going to look at the judge's comments and the examination of the word evil and psychopath. And I think the judge's comments were quite poignant. And if you look at the criminal trial, you've got the adversarial system in this country, defense, prosecution, and the judge is supposed to be neutral. And his comments, you're going to get a full copy of that to look at this evening, just the abridged version. And this is the document that you'll get. So again, please be aware that there is some distressing material in this webinar. You know, I sit here happily married with 3 children, 2 grandchildren. A lot of you guys will be mums, grandmothers and that. So please do be aware. There's nothing, can I just tell you, there's no post-mortem photographs or anything that graphic. I also think, particularly this evening, it's really, really important, I believe, that we should give a thought for the victims and relatives this evening. It's one of the most emotive cases I've certainly seen in British criminal history. The trial was probably one of the longest. It was kept reasonably quiet for obvious reasons, so the jury weren't tainted. And whilst we learn about this case, please do spare a thought for these little tiny victims, their parents, their relatives, their family, and friends. This talk does not seek to glamorize serial killing, far from it. And I've worded this very, very carefully. It merely illustrates the nature of serial killers, their crimes, and explores what motivates a human being to unmercifully extinguish the life of others. That interest came to me as a police officer, then latterly at university, and now the work that I do. Perhaps I should explain with criminologists and psychologists, the good news is that we can't agree on anything, which is good news because that allows for good discussion. Generally speaking, criminologists agree, certainly in the UK and Europe, that a serial killer is someone that's killed at least 3 people over a period of 3 weeks or more. So it's not spree killing like we've seen where, you know, with at the concert in Manchester, for instance, that was not a serial killing. However, unfortunately, my friends in the United States of America have got a different definition, and that is 2 or more people over a period of 2 weeks or more. So therefore, they have more serial killings per se than we do. This is the style that I've decided to go for this evening to try and make it as interesting as possible for you guys. So it starts off with, I'm going to talk to you about some general psychology and criminological points or information. And what we're going to do is we're going to hone this funnel down by looking at different ways of looking at murder. So this is still quite general. And then why do people commit these crimes? And then what we're going to look at is some really interesting work about how you can apply red flags, not only to the nursing profession, but also to the caring profession, to see if there's any indicators that they may well be up to something they should not be doing. From like Harold Shipman, he started off with theft of pethidine because he had a drug habit, then leading right the way on to multiple murders. And then we're going to look at, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, a lot of people know this, the traits of a psychopath. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the judge's comments, which I've underlined the salient points, and I'm going to ask you to take those points and see if you can attach it to one of the grids, which would give us a better insight into the mind of Lucy Letby. And then we're going to look at some conclusions, and there will certainly be time at the end. And if we could leave it to the end for questions, we might not get through all the material. I always produce too much. There are different ways of looking at murder. It depends where you're coming from, what discipline you're in. And of course, I started off policing by who did it, who done it, dare I use that terminology. That is all I was interested in. That is all the courts are interested in. They're not interested in motives at all, unless it helps the prosecution case. So as Harold Shipman's barrister said, who nearly got him off, let's be clear about this, I thought he was going to get off. He said, there's no room in this courtroom for any psychology chitter-chatter or babble. We're here to find out whether he killed all these people or not. And we say, you know, we didn't do it. And of course, we know what the result was of that. Criminological, what type of person would do this? And of course, we're going to explore this. Geographical, I've got to say, if you haven't read anything about offender profiling and geographical profiling, I have a Facebook group called Crime and Forensic Psychology Addicts. There's 2,500 people on that, and I do free gigs on that, and I'm going to do offender profiling soon. It is fascinating. It's not yet a science, in other words, it can't be replicated, but it is really, really fascinating. And as a mathematician, as I'm looking at a huge long formula which would make your toes curl about how that can be used to try and identify where a person's anchor points are, where they work and that. And then psychological. And of course, the jump that I've taken is more from the who done it to why did they do it? Why did they do it? But as you know, I've mentioned 3 cases, and I was the first senior investigating officer that had something to do with Levi Belfield. His first attack, I was called out from home to deal with it. And again, the why of Levi Belfield is still unknown. So I've mentioned 3 or 4 serial killers now, and you can see that the why is certainly a big question, but one that's difficult to answer. And statistically, how many victims? I'm not going to throw too many statistics about this evening, because I love it, but if you didn't like maths at school, Dean, then you can hide under your chair. Yeah. So okay, so moving on from that, motives. And what I'm going to do, this is an introspective. What I don't, I have this sort of petty hate is, if we're interested in true crime or a psychologist, people don't want to know, particularly you saying, I think. It's not worth the paper it's on. It's good to speculate maybe, but what you have to do is to really come up with the evidence. So these are some I've put together just to really try and enrich this evening. So if you followed the trial or any of it, the big plank was here that one of the possible motives was to gain the attention. I think it was a registrar colleague who she was infatuated with, and that is one of the potential motives. She enjoyed playing God. I have done a lecture series on looking at the whole range of care professionals to try and look at, is their criminal behaviour going up, or is it going down, or is it roughly the same? And one of the things I looked at was the doctor's oath, the Hippocratic oath, and the last sentence says, I will not play God. So there's a possibility that she enjoyed doing this, is, you know, having that opportunity to decide who lives and who dies. Letby got a thrill from the grief and despair of the parents. I'm absolutely convinced she did. And we're going to look at her behaviour to try and pin that down. She found caring for the less sick infants boring. The analogy, I decided as a police officer that I was going to put myself in places in the metropolis in London, which were going to be hard and not easy. So I would want to go really for the sort of full-on policing. And I think it was the same with her. Why she wanted to work in that particular neonatal unit, we know what her motives were. And of course, a big central plank of this trial is what she wrote down. And she wrote down, I'm pure evil, I'm not good enough. And she lied at the trial to explain that away, saying that that was just going through her thought processes. So those are some of the possible motives, just really to think about. So far as an investigator is concerned, for me as an SIO, as senior investigating officer, that is the most important thing for an investigation, the who did it, because as soon as you've got that, it makes the investigation a lot easier. So if you know that someone's been professionally murdered, in other words, a hit, you know the type of person you're looking for. I think the next slide is, if I remember rightly. Yeah, so the headlines a few days ago, you can see are full on. And I suppose what it does do is it reflects the temperature of the United Kingdom. Final act of wickedness, calculating, cunning, cruel, some of the words used by the trial judge. Just to get this out of the way, and you're not going to like this, I think it's highly unlikely that legislation will ever come in to force a suspect to stand in the dock and take their punishment. And the reason I don't think that will ever happen is that there are huge operational problems for that. Don't get me wrong, my own personal view, for what it's worth, I think they should do. But to physically remove someone from a cell, you're then looking at the degree of force used, how disruptive that person will be. So I don't actually think, I might be proved wrong, that there will ever be legislation to cater for that, unfortunately. This is something that's really, really important, and I'm sure a lot of people on here follow this bit here, and that is the medical psychological approach to murder, but particularly serial killings. We've all done it, where there's a search in which the killer, unsurprisingly, becomes the focus. Then there's relentless effort to look for a clue in their past, which might explain why they became a serial killer. Now, I wrote that down years ago, and in preparation for this evening, as I've been looking at, in fact, I saw a psychologist from today writing in the, I think it was the Telegraph. My wife showed me the article, and that was saying very, very clearly that there was nothing going on in her past. It's very dangerous to do that, because the serial killers that I've looked at, you'd like to think that they've been abused in some way when they've been young people. That's not always the case. In fact, often it's not. And there was an excellent book written called The Serial Killer Next Door, explaining what I said. So to delve into someone's background and look for that trigger is actually quite dangerous. Of course, sometimes there are. These are the homicide rates in England and Wales, a dreadful expression. We used to call it murder, but we used to call it forensic science. Now it's called CSI. We used to employ scenes of crimes officers that are now crime scene examiners. Anyway, so homicide, the definition, just so you know, that's premeditated murder, manslaughter, any unlawful act where the person dies. Infanticide Act 1961, where a woman kills their child within 1 year of that child being born, they can rely on the defence of postnatal depression. And lastly, a fairly new bit of legislation, corporate manslaughter. Okay, some of you might be surprised by this, but these are, can I just tell you, these are the only stats that I'm going to use. But these are, what I've done is I could go back in time, but this is 2019, so there was 600 odd offences, and these are the latest figures that came in to look at murders and everything else that goes with that, that finished on the 31st of March 2002. So let's just have a look at those, the facts of the 2002 homicides. I don't know whether that surprises any of you guys, where you thought it was, this is only England and Wales, by the way, not Scotland or Northern Ireland. So be interested to see what you guys think. So there's a few facts here. The notion that someone jumps out of the bushes and bumps someone off a woman is clearly not the case here, certainly not in 2002. 72% of the victims were male and 28% were female. Most common age group is 16 to 24. Isn't that sad, with 122 victims? That's mainly perpetuated through gang violence. I looked specifically, for obvious reason, at child victims less than 16, and in 2022 there were 54 where the parent or step-parent were the most common suspects. And again, that's actually quite useful as an SIO at the crime scene, the murder crime scene, to know that. Method of killing, it's a knife, unfortunately, in this country, by far. However, only 2 males and 3 females were poisoned. And Lucy Letby's behaviour, a lot of that will be classified and certified as poisoning, because that is what she did. We know she used insulin. The outcomes, again, I think this is disgraceful personally. That has dropped. 80% of suspects tried for murder were convicted. Now, you may think, well, actually, that's quite a high rate. That has dropped from 2017 from 93% to 80%. And I think that that is an absolute public outrage. So what we're doing, you can see we're quite general at the moment, and we're going to now start homing down and having a look at stuff. This may sound boring to you, theories of homicide, but it's important that you understand some of the principal theories which may help you to understand more inside the mind of Lucy Letby. Someone that signed up for this evening is here made a really good point. How could you possibly run this evening? You're not her psychotherapist, and that's absolutely true. I don't know whether she will ever reveal why she did it. There's no incentive to do so. She's never going to be released. I don't know what will happen in prison. But so I'm not a psychotherapist, and the best way, obviously, to find this out is on a one-to-one in a confidential room. But let's have a look at some of these. There's very little evidence, and I've touched on this, that psychiatric, in other words, mental illness, are at play when it comes to homicides, although they can't be discounted completely. So it's not, psychiatric factors, it must be something else. This guy here called Layton in 1986, and I've put the academic references down here in case you want to take note of them and look some of this up later. It examined its social class in terms of suspect and victim, and we look at pre-industrial. The killers were upper class, aristocracy, and they bumped off there. Can I just say that this is not my terminology, this is from the psychologists. They bumped off their lower class peasants because they could, and they would probably get away with it. Industrial times, when we come into that, from 1800 to 1945, the killers tended to be middle class and the victims lower working class, or what Layton called underclass. And now, and this does follow, it's not, it is the general rule, but killers tend to be lower to lower middle class and victims tend to be middle class. And of course, there are deviations around that. And this is Layton's paper, Hunting Humans. The next bit, again, I find really interesting. And can I just take my hat off to Broadmoor Hospital? They've just got an outstanding from the Quality Care Commission. And I've got to say, they work under the hardest circumstances. Do you restrain someone? If you do, and you choke them, they die. And then if you don't restrain them and they assault someone, so it's really difficult. But this is really interesting. This chap here at Broadmoor, Blackburn, 1971 goes back, but it's still a really important study. Looked at 56 patients that were in Broadmoor. So they were suffering from some form of mental illness, and he came up with 4 types. Depressive. Well, I don't know about you, I'm not so much these days. I'm quite a happy person, but we all go through periods of depression. But if that is continuous and non-abating, then you're going to look at some people falling into this. Over-controlled repressors of aggression. That sounds like gobbledygook. But basically what this is, and the way I get around it, is that I've been a martial artist for some years now, so I'm not an aggressive person, mercifully. But what I do is, if I want to let out my aggression, I do it by way of exercise, not by thumping my colleagues. But what Freud said, and I just had the privilege of returning from his practice in his house in Vienna, is that if you try and control your aggression and keep it inside you, and there's no simmering kettle with a valve to let that out, then you're going to become aggressive. And most of the manslaughter cases that I've seen where there has been, that's exactly what's happened. People have tried to control their aggression, it's all flown out, and someone gets killed. Paranoid aggressive, that's where the person's paranoid, they think people are after them. That's a very simplistic explanation, but this is the thing that I want to look at, because I want you guys to come up with your own impression and evidence where Lucy Letby hit on the psychopathic scale. It does not follow that if you hit the scale, and I'm going to use a particular measure this evening, and you get full marks, if you like, that you're going to go out and commit crime or indeed commit murder. That's not the case. And in this country, and indeed worldwide, psychopathy has never been considered and never will be considered a mental illness. This guy here, what he did is, furthermore, this pattern's also been found in non-psychiatric groups of offenders. In other words, outside of Broadmoor Hospital, for instance. Again, all these references you can have a look at. And if you are a student of psychology, hopefully, and there are some, I should have said there's some undergrads this evening from University Kent psychology department. So again, a warm welcome. This is what we're here for, and it's taken me 32 minutes to talk about why you're here. And before I do that, I'm just going to have a quick drink of my Coke. Those that you know me really well, I usually have a glass of wine, but this is such a serious topic that I don't want anything to cloud my mind. So what I want to do, I keep trying to take this, I need to have a bit of a course on Zoom. Anyway, as I said at the beginning, and some of you might not hit, you've not missed anything. If you want all the answers from me, unfortunately, you're not going to get them. I can talk to you about, I'm not going to speculate at all, but you can draw your own conclusions. And as the learned trial judge said, and we're going to see the exact words, we don't know why you committed these offences. He said, only you know. And that's interesting, because what he would have done, the trial judge, is he would have ordered a medical and psychiatric report on Lucy Letby. But at the end of the day, they were of little value, because obviously the trial judge had it in his mind to impose whole life, and rightly so, whole life sentences. I've had quite a few of you, please don't let me forget this, because I'm here to answer your questions. I've had a few of you say, well, why did she, Lucy Letby, get a whole life sentence where Beverly Ailey didn't? And I've got an answer for you for that, a proper answer. It's not out of my head, I looked it up. But let's please make sure at the end, if I've not covered that, I have. So how do care professionals, particularly nurses, doctors, care professionals, how do they commit offences? Before I do this, and I'm a huge user of the NHS at the moment, these cases are statistically insignificant. In other words, they're so rare that if you're trying to do some studies in the UK, you have to go elsewhere to start making generalisations. And also, you know, the NHS, we know that during COVID they were brilliant, and they continue to be. You know, they've got their problems, but they continue to be what I think is a brilliant service. Why do they commit offences? Because they can. That's not very useful, but this is. They've got good access to victims. If I want to go and bump someone off or kill someone, I've got to leave my property. I've got to go somewhere. I'm going to be under surveillance. Whereas in hospitals, I've got a good access to victims. This, again, I'm going to show you, and this is a study that I've used many, many times. I don't know whether you're aware, is that one of the poor parents during this, during these serial killings, actually walked into the room when Lucy Letby was, I believe, trying to murder a child. And the reason why she didn't challenge her, we're going to have a look at, but they're hiding under this umbrella of the doctor-nurse delusion of respectability. I've got to tell you, I don't know about you guys, but I think post-Shipman, I mean, we all used to look at the doctors as a deity. We'd never challenge them. I certainly do now. When a patient dies at home and attended by a physician recently, there is no post-mortem. Post-shipment, it's slightly better, although it's taken our country 20 years to implement the excellent recommendations made by Dame Janet Smith to try and cut down on the amount of offences that are going to take place in the future. It's of interest to me where at public inquiries, and of course there is going to be a public inquiry, that the chair stands up and says, we're conducting this inquiry to make sure it never happens again. And what happens? It happens again. So that's not very useful, but it'd be interesting to see the chair of this inquiry, whether they say that. They've got a ready market to access to medicines. And again, we're going to look at this. They have power. If we're unwell and we're in a hospital bed, we're not going to start arguing, are we? You know, we're not going to start arguing with the doctors, nurses, the medics, the physios. We want them to make us better. They also have got good control. There are essentially three reasons, and this is a lecture series which I'm not going into, why people commit serial killings. Three particular reasons. Biological, it might be that the person was born like it. It was inherited. And with most psychopaths, it is unfortunately inherited. Psychological and sociological reasons, and that is subject of a series of lectures that I do around these, looking at all the different perspectives. The why, and this is really, really important. The reason why healthcare professionals kill are, generally speaking, these heads that I'm going to show you, heads of offending behaviour. And I don't think Lucy Letby fits into any of them, but that's just me. Mercy or compassion, demanding patience, that's quite worrying, isn't that? Freeing up beds, there has certainly been in the United States, there's been quite a lot of evidence that shows that people have been bumped off, sometimes subtly, to free up beds. Material gain, that is a possibility that Harold Shipman, in fact, we know evidentially that he forged a will of someone, and that's largely how he's caught. So material gain, and that's generally a financial one. And this one here, Munchausen's syndrome by proxy. And I'm going to explain that straight away, what I mean by Munchausen's syndrome by proxy. And I'm going to tell you about a case that I've got wasn't my case, that I've got intimate knowledge about, and tell you how the public reacted to it. So this is a psychologist that has come up with these main reasons. And of course, I don't think Letby fits into that, possibly the last one, but you can be the deciders of that. Here's a picture of Beverly Aylett. She loved all of the publicity around the case. There's no doubt about that. I'm going to show you quite a striking photograph. But Munchausen's syndrome is where a person repeatedly acts as though they are ill and they're not. And it goes a lot further than a cold or something like that. It's actually making yourself ill and then presenting to doctors and medics. And this syndrome was discovered by Baron Munchausen a number of years ago. And by proxy is where another person, often a child, is presented by the person suffering with it. Beverly Aylett did this to bring attention to herself through her victims. So what she did is she was murdering these young children, these young babies, to bring attention to her. This is by proxy. Very briefly, again, one of the greatest hospitals in the world, the Royal Brompton Hospital up in central London. Really good mate of mine, DI, rings me up and said, I'm just about to take this action. I was thinking, and it was very risky. And that was a child was being presented with breathing problems, and the child stopped breathing whilst he was in hospital. And the DI at what was then Chelsea Police Station strongly suspected that the mother was suffering from Munchausen's syndrome by proxy. So he said what he's going to do is he's going to make application to the Commissioner of Police to put a hidden camera in the room where the child is most of the time with the mother. If you just think about that for a minute, and that goes on to possible solutions to stop the type of behaviour from Lucy Letby again, there is a lot of ethical issues there. Anyway, safe to say that this child was on a respirator, or no, it wasn't a respirator, it was a facility to help her breathe. And you could see the mother on the camera putting her hand over the mouth and nose of the child and stopping the oxygen running. So she was arrested for that, never charged. But you can see the operational problems around that. Alet's attention-seeking behaviour continues in Rampton High Security Prison. This here, guys, is, some of you will know this, this experiment, but I'm going to bring this to life and show you how it really affects this case. So in 1961, a guy called Stanley Milgram, his mum and dad had survived the Holocaust. He was a 27-year-old psychologist. And what he was looking at, experimentation to see why it was that the Nazis during the Second World War, respectable men and women, turned to this horrific behaviour during the Second World War. So what he did is he put an advert in the paper, and he said that he was looking for people to come and help with an experiment where it was going to be a simulated teaching and learning experiment. And the volunteers were going to be the teacher. Milgram and his associates then hired an actor, and in front of the teachers, wired him up to this box here, which was capable of shocking the actor with 15 volts, which is a slight shock, going up to what Milgram and his associates called XXX. And what happened is they asked, you can, by the way, you can see all this on YouTube if you want to. It's on there, the original one, and Darren Brown did one recently. It was a lie. So what happened is that the volunteers had to ask a series of questions, and if the learner, i.e. the actor, got it wrong, they were to be administered with an electric shock. But it was a nonsense, because the person was not hooked up, the actor was not hooked up to anything at all. So once he got it wrong to about here, he was yelling and screaming out, stop it, stop it. But here's the thing. Milgram's experimenter was in a lab coat. Yeah, we've all seen these probably when we're at school. And as the teacher was saying, I can't do this anymore, the person in authority wearing the lab coat said, the experiment, exact words, requires that you continue please. And it was horrific. Most people were prepared in this experiment to administer electric shocks that they knew that was going to kill that person. And that's exactly what I believe that happened in this case here. Lucy Letby, as we're going to see in a minute, because I've done a direct comparison between her and Alet, she was a very, very clever person, and she was a person in authority. And that was the problem in this case, because she was so well thought of. Even now, after this long and expensive trial, her friends are just saying this is a mistake, as did Shipman's patients. they said this is wrong. They shouldn't have been convicted. So I think obedience to authority is one of the things that she hid behind in order to commit her offences. Standing Milgram, a highly unethical experiment, by the way. Yeah, I'll be booted out of my professional association if I did that. Red flags. This is really, really important. This is so we're moving in to looking at the behaviour of Lucy Letby and what are, this is one of these words that has crept into the English language, hasn't it? Which is overused, but it's more than appropriate here. And again, I find this fascinating. So what were, or what are the red flags that shows that a care professional is doing something they shouldn't be doing, whether it's stealing drugs on one hand, or the extreme behaviour of Letby, where she was murdering these young mites? One of them is moves from, there's quite a few of these, by the way, but again, this is being recorded, so you can see this later, is moving from one hospital to another. That's to evade capture or suspicion, is to move the suspicion away by going to another hospital. Secretive or difficult personal relationships. Beverly Aylett, she certainly had some very, very difficult personal relationships when she was in a training mode for nursing. In her own room, she smeared feces all around her room, and some of her peers found out about this. History of mental instability or depression. There was no evidence whatsoever that Lucy Letby was suffering from any form of mental illness, none whatsoever. They will predict when someone will die. Well, she didn't do that directly, but again, when we look at the judge's comments shortly, she came very, very close to that. Makes odd comments or claims to be jinxed. She made some terribly inappropriate comments to the parents of some of these children, as you'll see. Likes to talk about death, odd behaviours when someone dies. Well, one of those odd behaviours was looking the parents up on Facebook. That was one of the planks of the prosecution case. When the children had died, the Letby was looking up the personal details of not only Facebook, but any other social media handles they could get on the parents of the deceased child. Higher instances of death on his or her shift. That's got to be looked at, hasn't it? I mean, I don't want to move away from what we're discussing, but the public inquiry, there were consultants, weren't there, ringing alarm bells. But because of the way we're fixated about industrial tribunals, people's rights, whistleblowers and that sort of stuff, it appears, well, I'm not going to say anything because it's a subject of public inquiry. Seems inordinately enthused about her skills. She was blowing a trumpet all the time, and she was a very, very clever woman. She was let's not forget, unlike Beverly Aylett, she was a mentor to other neonatal nurses. Makes inconsistent statements when challenged about deaths, which she did in this case. Prefers night shifts. There's fewer colleagues around. Most of public services, apart from, I suppose, when I was in the police, there was more of us during the night. But a lot of professionals, there's very few people around. Yeah, I think even now, a lot of doctors and that will cover a night shift. If there's nothing happening, they will sleep, and if people want them, they'll wake them up. Associated with incidents at other hospitals. Been involved with other criminal activities. Yeah, so that's half of them, and then moving through quite quickly. Makes colleagues anxious or suspicious, as they did. Craves attention, tries to prevent others checking his or her patients. Hangs around during investigations of death. That is so that they can get an insight as to what's been talked about, so that they can be forearmed. in possession of drugs at home in a locker, lied about personal information, and this is what we do know, and this is congruent for both Alet and Letby. They're in possession of books about poison or serial murder. Not the case, but what they were in possession of in both cases was the handover logs, because they couldn't afford for those logs to be there because medicines have been administered. Disciplinary problems appear to have a personality disorder, substance abuse, as Shipman did. And this is a really interesting study here. It's a book, Inside the Minds of Healthcare Serial Killers, Why They Kill. Oh, by the way, I should say at the end, there's some books that I've read which I find particularly useful, and some articles which are again free. This is quite useful, and this is a book, and it's just called Serial Killing, and it's the most expensive book that I've bought. And every time a revision comes out, I go and buy it. It's 50 quid, so it's not for the faint-hearted. But it's written by two people. It had to be. It's a chap called Holmes, yeah, who was a forensic medical examiner, a coroner, or still is in the United States, and a guy called DeBurger, a psychologist. This seminal work here is really, really helpful, because what it does do is, in behavioural science units, it gives the police or the psychologist the opportunity of being able to look at the nature of the offence and put it into one of 4 categories, or spanning the categories. Let me explain, and we'll see where we think Lucy Letby fits. The first one is visionary. It's usually where the person has got a mental illness and they get a vision from some sort of deity or the devil, whatever that may is, to go out and kill. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of legislation, very draconian legislation, was put around glue sniffing, because a lot of these youngsters that were glue sniffing, it was giving them all sorts of visions through a chemical imbalance in the brain. The next one is missionary. I'm on a mission to go out and kill. And probably one of the best examples of that was a bloke called Donald Gaskin. I couldn't believe it years ago when I read this. This is the only guy I know that had got a twin track serial killing. So he had a business, and if you didn't pay your bill on time, he would come out and bump you off. And then secondly, he was operating on the coast, indiscriminately taking victims down on the coast. But this guy was on a mission to kill. Hedonistic, I kill because I want to and I can and I like doing it. And I think Ted Bundy, who's the most written about serial killer, certainly from my discipline, said, and I quote, "There is nothing better than holding in your hands the decision whether or not someone lives." In other words, playing God. And then this last one, power and control, which we talked about often with in child sexual abuse cases. Again, a brilliant book written by a guy called Nick Groff, looking at why people do this. And I had to learn this because, and I'll tell you, that one of my hardest roles was the DI in charge of the Central London Child Protection Team for 3 years. So knowing all this stuff was good, and I hoped and prayed, I have to say, that I hoped that there would never be a child killing during the 3 years that I was there, but we were prepared for it. So I've just put in some people at random, serial killers. I think that Jack the Ripper there fitted into these two. Harold Shipman was certainly on, well, he could probably go into other boxes there, but he was certainly on a driven mission to kill. Peter Sutcliffe, who is now dead, he liked killing sex workers. And then we've got Fred and Rose West, power and control. Levi Belfield. When I heard some of the transcripts, if you ever get the opportunity to hear Colin Sutton's a good mate of mine, very, very prolific on the TV. And when we retired, we lived within 10 minutes drive of each other. So unsurprisingly, we've done some work together, and you're going to see that in a minute. Belfield, but I looked at some of the transcripts of what Belfield was doing to his girlfriends, and it begged belief. Stephen Paul, the grinding killer who was killing gay young men, and this is a really, really good book. It's called Serial Killing, Holmes and de Burgard. Highly recommend it. Get it secondhand though. Don't pay 50 quid for it. And Power and Control there, I think that comes under Beverly Aylet. I've done a comparison because I want to debunk a popular myth about the two. So I find that quite interesting, and I'm going to elaborate on this picture. There's something else you can see here. I don't know what you're thinking here, but this was when she was being taken to prison. This is Beverly Aylet, by the way, after she'd been sentenced. She was loving it, wasn't she? And here is Lucy Letby. This is not scientific, but according to the senior investigating officer in the Aylet case, he says that Letby may have learned and copied from Aylet. And if you look at the psychology of aggression and violence, and again, that is for another time, it's either innate or it's learned behavior, and I suppose it's a possibility. But let's just have a look at both of them. She had a very troubled upbringing, and she was a pathological liar. She failed her nursing exams. She was what was then, I don't know whether there's a demarcation. There was a state enrolled nurse at the time. I need to take advice on this. And then there was a state registered nurse, and you kind of almost needed a degree to be a state registered nurse. State enrolled nurses were brilliant, but they weren't allowed to operate machinery and stuff. They were more complicated. So she kept failing her nursing exams and should have been booted out, to be honest. Very, very bizarre behaviour, and I've articulated one of those behaviours, and parts of the nursing logs were found at her home address. She was diagnosed with Munchausen's syndrome by proxy by a guy called Professor Meadows. Now, Meadows' work has come under scrutiny as well. He is a consultant psychiatrist, and his work has come under scrutiny. No remorse at all, and a non-whole life sentence. And that's just triggered my grey matter to come back and tell you why she didn't get a whole life sentence. Then if you look at Letby, she had a very loving upbringing, as did Harold Shipman, as did, I don't know, I've forgotten his name, I just mentioned him, the American Ted Bundy, a very loving upbringing. Pathological liar, so that's congruent, a very clever, a nurse mentor to others, no remorse. Parts of the nursing logs are found at the home address. No evidence whatsoever brought by the Crown or the defence, sorry, the prosecution or the defence, none whatsoever. Whole life sentence imposed. So let's go back to that. What I did do, and I looked the answer up because I knew you guys were going to ask this. So when you impose a whole life sentence, the judge has to work through a menu and has to tick off things. So they are extreme cases, particularly where there's been abject cruelty, as there was in this case, ranging right the way through to murder of a police officer. If you do that, you can be allocated a whole life sentence. Where it differs between the two, and I read the prosecution appealed in the Aylet case to the Attorney General and said the sentence was unduly lenient. I mean, she got life sentences, but what the Lord Chief Justice said is, I've heard evidence that she's suffering from mental illness, so therefore the tariff of 30 years is correct, yeah, and not a whole life sentence. So the difference between the two And the reason why Alec didn't get a whole life sentence, and it was made explicitly clear. You can look this up on the net, which is what I did for this particular part of the gig, is to see that the Lord Chief Justice explained very clearly why that didn't happen, whereas Letby did. When I'm going to email you guys as a follow-up, I have the privilege of being a reader at a university, which is the Centre for the Study and Investigation of Serial Killing. It is such a privilege because as a psychologist and a mathematician, I've got access to the data. And one of the things I sat down and did about 2 or 3 years ago was looked at this notion that all serial killers are A, intelligent, and B, want to get caught. It was a fascinating study, but what I discovered, and I'm going to send you the paper, it's only 4 pages, is what I discovered is that there is no truth in the fact that a serial killer, generally speaking, is intelligent. Far from it. They often will get caught because of their lack of intelligence. The way I was able to do it was to look at the people's IQ, either post or pre-conviction, and then look at the general IQ of people in the United States, Germany, and here. And then I came up with this idea that they're not intelligent at all. And the idea, but what I did find out is the more intelligent they are, as in the Letby case, the more they're likely to use more crueler ways of actually putting the person to death, such as torture. And in this case, and what I'm about to say is distressing, the judge in his comments said in this case that the children must have experienced extreme pain in some cases. So that's the reason. Psychopathy, this is where I'm not going to have a break, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to stop. Well, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to go into the chat box, and I'm going to put in here my website. Okay. How did you, actually, I wasn't going to answer your questions, but this one's staring me in the face. How did you assess their IQ pre-conviction? This is Rebecca has asked this question, because that evidence was in the case file. That's simple. In a lot of cases, pre-conviction, and I'll tell you for why is that, and I can't remember the number, but if you are under a certain IQ in the United States, where every state used to have capital punishment, if you were under that IQ, you couldn't be put to death. So that is how I knew their IQs. And I was also interested to see whether there was a variation between pre-sentence and post-sentence. Probably 70. Yeah, I've got it. And you'll see that in the paper that I sent to you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to type in here my website, okay, which is the Crime Lab, thecrimelab.co.uk. And there is, not just for this evening, there is a page called resources. So I'm going to let you have a look at that. I suppose if I don't know if I stick in a HTTP in front of that, whether that might actually give you the opportunity of going straight in the crimelab.co.uk/resources. Does that make it easier? Yeah, it does. If I've spelt that all correctly, you should be able to hyperlink through. The resources are there for your information. If you're interested in psychology, true crime, there's a shed load of stuff there. But the first one has got 2 documents on it. Okay. The important one is that you get sight of. If you can't do it, it doesn't matter. You can do it at a later date. But this is where we're going to make this a bit interactive. And I'm going to shut up for a little while. Good. Yeah. So what I'd like you to do is there's the judge's comments. It's 10 pages long. We haven't got time to go in that, but that's for you, and you'll find that on the resources. But what I have done is I have annotated and highlighted some important points that I'm about to talk about. You should also have on that, you should see very clearly all the variables or the traits of a psychopath. Yeah, and we're going to talk about, sorry, there's just some people struggling to get in here, and we're going to talk about that. So the two documents you need: judges' comments that have been annotated or highlighted by me, and secondly, the screen showing the variation. So what we'll do is let's just have a quick look at that. So I just need to go back to where we're up to. So can I just ask, can you see a slide that's got psychopathy on it? Yeah, good. Okay. Let's just have a quick whiz through this, and it will be quite quick. Definition of a psychopath. Yeah, this is the one that I like the most. It's not mine. So when people think of a psychopath, I'm going to have to change this because a lot of young people don't know who Hannibal Lecter is, but it's in Silence of the Lambs, one of my favourite films, a brilliant film. So psychopaths are, according to this chap here, social predators who charm, manipulate, and ruthlessly plough their way through life, leaving a broad trail of broken hearts, shattered expectations, and empty wallets. I think I'm going to need help for this from some of my clients or students that I've spoken to before. If you really want to see a really good example of a psychopath, a criminal psychopath that's not a murder, there is, oh, I know, I've remembered it. On Netflix, it's called The Tinder Swindler. And what I want you to do is to take all the variables that you've got now, and I'm going to explain that, the different traits, and watch The Tinder Swindler and see where that applies. The reason I've used this definition, and I've started using this in the last couple of years, is because it's by what I consider, and it's dangerous to say this sometimes, one of the world's leading experts on psychopathy. This chap, Robert Hare, has dedicated most of his working life to it, and this was his original book, which can be bought quite cheaply. It's called Without Conscience. And when people are screened for psychopathy, generally speaking, they will use this version, and they will use his his screening process, and there's a number of different ones. The one that we're going to look at is called the Hare psychopathy checklist, and it's called the SV, the shortened version. But this is quite an interesting one, and what I don't want to do is to run too far over time. I find this fascinating, this bit here. So am I able to access this? Yeah, I am. I'll tell you what, indulge me, guys. Yeah, do you know that book, Ellie, thank you so much here, the John Ronson book called the I can't go backwards because I'll knock my green screen over, The Psychopath Test, which centers on it. It's an excellent book. Yeah, really, really good. So I would second that. But what I'd like you to do is just to indulge me really, really quickly, is just to put in your answers: A, how many, and B, in the prison. So in prison, in this country, in England and Wales. So in the population, that is the population of England and Wales, how many people do you think score very, very highly on the population in percentage terms? And how many people in prison are measured to be extreme psychopaths? Brilliant. Thank you. This is always good. It just shows that a lot of you will probably be actually a lot better at this than me. Yeah, thanks for indulging me here. Yeah, Joanna Grain, Ayla looks happy and almost excited by the attention, and Letby absolutely looks stunned and embarrassed. Yeah, Ayla did have a low IQ as well. Thank you very much for this. Yeah, brilliant. Really, really good. Perhaps I should have given a prize here. Karen, you're almost spot on for the first bit. In the population in England and Wales, it's believed there are 1 to 2% of the population that score very highly on the Hare psychopath checklist, but that changes to 25% of people in prison. Now, if you accept a lot of people reoffend, there has been absolutely no training to police officers around how to interview people that are psychopaths, or holding people hostage, or kidnapping people, which really defies belief. But thanks very much for doing that. So where are we up to? So very, very quickly, some facts you might not be aware of. And again, I don't want to run over here. Psychopathy is not considered a mental illness. It's a complex interaction between biological proneness, in other words, you inherit it, social learning, criminogenic environments, and parenting dynamics. So it's a good blend of those. First coined in 5 BC. This was this Athenian general, charming, manipulative, reckless, impulsive, and violent. Lead exposures recently have been linked with the behaviours, and this is an area where I'm not skilled at all, don't profess to be. Biological psychology, psychopaths showed a marked thinning of different parts of the brain. But this is interesting, isn't it? Psychopaths have a much lower fear threshold. Can you imagine, let's just park because it's too emotive to start delving into that. But can you imagine, or perhaps you want to, I don't know, go out and kill someone, go out or murder someone, premeditated? There's loads of reasons why I wouldn't do it. First of all, there's the morality. Secondly, the fact that, you're going to go to prison and all the rest of it. But psychopaths have got a much lower fear threshold. And quite often when you do the measuring there around now, hear me clearly here, you wouldn't categorize someone even from the Hare checklist as a psychopath, because there is some other work that you need to do. Going through a checklist and then coming up with a score is useful, but there are other elements to it. So hear me clearly here. I don't know about you guys, I hate going on fast rides. When I went to Disney, I think my kids thought it was boring because I wouldn't go on them. But there is a strong correlation. If I had the time, I would do it, between these fast rides and psychopathy. Forbes magazine, and again, one of you fell straight into my hand, said it depends what job you're in. But Forbes magazine reported recently that 3 to 21% of CEOs are psychopathic in nature. And I've heard some instances recently where CEOs of some public bodies, the way they talk to their staff, beggars belief. And this might be one of the reasons. So we've gone through this. We've had I've discussed very, very briefly, developed to carry out assessment. There's 20 traits or variables with a score. And these are the other things you need to do, is to take into consideration antisocial personality disorder before the age of 15, and then aged at least 18 or above. Pre-15, things like bunking off school or truanting, swearing at your parents, low-level crime, that sort of thing. That evidence needs to be accrued and taken into consideration. These are the different traits, and I'm going to go through them quite quickly. Impulsive. If it was just that, I'd be scoring highly on this, because I love impulse. Come on then, let's go and do this. Come on, this is a part of our business we could really develop. Let's do it. But that doesn't say that I'm going to go on to commit offences or indeed murder. This is the big one. And if you want to measure this, and that's what psychologists are very, very good at, is measuring things. Straight after the lockdown, or even now, if you haven't seen a friend for a while and you talk to them over the phone or Zoom or in front, ask them about them and their family or their friends, and just see how long it takes for that person to ask you about you and yours. It's a really interesting one. Egocentricity, I think, needs to be, personally, there needs to be some research to bias this, to sort of up it, because it seems very, very prevalent. That's the hallmark. Shallow emotion. So how many of these are resonating with, first of all, Lucy Letby? Yeah, with Lucy Letby, from what I've had a look at. Lacking empathy, lacking guilt, callous, superficially charming, need stimulation, yeah, incapacity to love, pathological liar. That is really important. There's been a couple of cases in the States where the Green River Killer, for instance, was hooked up to a lie detector 2 or 3 times, passed it each time. I don't think his pulse rate went up at all. Pathological liar. Conning, manipulative, parasitic lifestyle, poor behaviour controls. We've seen all of this. Sorry, I was just having to move someone there. Early behaviour problems, and right in the middle of that, criminal aspects, juvenile delinquency, criminal versatility, and recall to prison. So if someone's been recalled to prison loads of times, yeah. I've got to say, guys, when I retired from the Met, I retrained as a mathematics teacher at a high school. Never ever do that. It's harder to teach year 10s than it is to investigate a murder. But one of the jobs I enjoyed is I was head of education for His Majesty's, as it is now, prison service in Norfolk. And it was really interesting looking at psychopathy. I believe you can't treat it. You can certainly counsel it, but I don't think you can treat it as such. And then looking at the backgrounds of some of these guys and just actually giving them a good stimulation to try and stop them committing offences. So I'm going to stop here. What I'd like you to do, and we're only going to spend just 5 minutes on this, I think, is to take those variables, and you've got a copy of these. And what I'd like you to do is to match up these variables against some or all of the comments that were made by the judge. And I've given you copies of those through our website. And just see if you can take some of these variables or traits and apportion them to Lucy Letby's behaviour. And that is according to the comments that the learned trial judge made at Manchester Crown Court. Okay, and then I'll look at the chat box. Yeah, Ellie, thank you very much for backing up what I said. They tried treating psychopaths in the 70s. Program failed spectacularly. Just taught them to be better psychopaths. Yeah, and I've seen some sort of study that almost mirrors what you're saying there. Yeah, straight away, you guys are making assessments here. Thank you very much for these, guys. It's really, really good. It's like working. I'm sure some of you, well, I know some of you are grads, but it's like working with undergrads at the moment with some of the answers that you're giving. Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. And there's lots and lots of answers to this. Lying, saying she never hurt the babies. Cool, didn't she get a good crack of the whip from the jury there? They were out for what, nearly a month? Something like that, deliberating. So I think a fair crack of the whip there. Lacking guilt, shallow emotion, says one of you. Lacking empathy and lying. Superficially charming as well as liked amongst colleagues. Whilst it's not an offence to lie to the police or tell lies, I often saw in cases, criminal cases, juries don't like people lying. They don't like people changing their stories. Yeah. Callous, says one of you, in quotation marks, shall I put him in here? Boredom, conning and manipulative, fooling colleagues with persona. Did she lie to her friends or just about work? She lied to her friends as well. Superficially charming, need for stimulation, had to continue. Do you think she's a psychopath, Steve Gaskin? Absolutely. You know, I can't say 100%, but I'd love to actually sit down and run the test with her. Can I just share with you as well is that I did the on the Wayne Couzens thing, the psychology behind his antics, but no one's ever asked him why. And we're going to put in a visiting order to ask to go and see him for him to explain why he did it. I can imagine what the reply to that will be, and one of the words I think will be off, but at least we're going to attempt that. Yes, I do think she's a psychopath. Looking at those variables and relying just on the judge's comments alone, definitely. And she would, on the hair shortened version checklist, she would score 33, which is the highest you can score, and that's kind of levels up with Ted Bundy. There was a guy called Peter Anthony Manuel. You guys would love this case. He was the last person to be executed in Scotland in the 50s, and he was a serial killer. Very, very interesting. Victim mentality. Yeah, these are really good answers. Thank you. Lack of remorse. I want to deal with that, and I'll just put a note on my notes about lack of remorse, lacking guilt, irresponsible. Do you know what? How many? I don't even know. There's 71 of us on tonight, and I think I've got a comment from all of you. That's brilliant. What is happening regarding the management ignoring the complaints from staff? The answer is I don't know. I don't, and I'd love to be able to have a discussion around that. But that is a big thing, isn't it? I'd love to be able to say, perhaps I should, to the NHS, this is a longitudinal study about the red flags. Do you want to adopt this? You know, I don't know what is happening to the management, ignoring the complaints from staff. I don't know. Will there be fall guys? Will there be scapegoats? Will there be disciplinary hearings? I don't know. Don't a lot of psychopaths try to lie on their tests? Yes, they do, and that is why you have to take other behaviours. Okay, one of the things that I've neglected to tell you about is this. The papers, and also for us, and most importantly for the victims' relatives, in the process, in the healing process, is to hear from these suspects, the likes of Aylett and Letby now, that they were sorry for what they did. That is a big start. But in both cases, they can't do it, can they? There's legal reasons for that. And that is, if you're going to appeal, now I would imagine that Lucy Letby will almost certainly appeal. I don't know, but that is So she can't say sorry, because if she says sorry, there's no credence in her appeal. And that was the same with Rolf Harris. He died a few weeks ago, and that is why he never said sorry. It's a legal reason for it. And of course, the papers, and rightly so, and that person was not remorseful. And the judge said it in his summing up. Yeah. Okay, so we're nearly at the end here. What I'm hoping is that I'll come out of this. I'm hoping that I've still got the slide in front of me. Can you just give me a thumbs up? That's got all the variables on it for psychopathy. Is that right? Good, thank you. So moving on from that, there's two different factors within these definitions. One is factor one, selfishness, callous, and use of others, using others to get your own ends. And then there's chronically unstable and antisocial life. And that shows all the different ones. But again, this is going to be recorded and you can look at it. I'm just thinking, this you need to know. The press would have you the same. What is the difference? I'm asked that all the time. So if you've got two intersecting circles, the intersection in the middle, the shared traits, regularly breaks or flouts the law, constantly lies. We've been through that. It's impulsive, doesn't plan ahead, can be prone to fighting, and aggressive, doesn't feel any remorse, irresponsible, can't meet financial obligations, and has little regard for the safety of others. And then you can see that the main difference between these two here is, generally speaking, it's innate, whereas a sociopathy, you can learn it. People seen as pawns tend to be more erratic, tend to be well educated, often able to form relationships. I don't know, someone needs to advise me. I'm probably, I don't know whether Lucy Letby had relationships. I know she was certainly wanted to, and I believe she did actually go out with that doctor, but I don't know any other backgrounds. This is again the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, long title there, documents each mental disorder, and as new ones are discovered, so that goes into the manual, and guess what's missing from it is psychopathy. That's because we've all got traits. We've all got these traits. I thought this was quite useful here. You can see this is the detective constable in the Aylett case. Can you see the grief on her face? Whereas Beverly Aylett's loving it. I'm going to finish with this. What is evil? You know, you can read about evil. You can look at pictures of hell, whatever that is. And in this case, the word evil was used. And I'm going to finish with this most fascinating of studies to start to help us to understand what was really in Lucy Letby's mind. Please forgive this slide, but again, you can mull over this in your own time. It's called Gradations of Evil, and it was produced not that long ago by a psychologist from Stanford University, by Michael Stone, Dr. Michael Stone. It's called The Anatomy of Evil, and I think this is really, really interesting. If you look on the top there, so 1 to 8 is impulsive murders, and the levels here we're going to have a look at, and I've put examples in myself. You then look from 9 to 15, and that's semi-psychopaths, and then 16 to 21 is full-on psychopathy, and that will give you examples. With some of you, I did an evening around extreme psychopaths and serial killers, and we looked at some really unusual behaviours, and then looked at where they came on this scale. But I personally think this is a really good bit of work. And this guy here, Michael Stone, he acknowledges the work that we've looked at by Professor Hare and his colleagues. So if we look at impulsive murder, we start off low here, justified homicide. That is when we're at war, the state enables us to go and kill people. We're given that were enabled to do that, facilitated, or a police officer killing an armed suspect. Yeah, so that's right at the bottom level of the scale. Then jealous lovers, non-psychopathic, heat of passion and egocentricity. They might do that. I was asked by the BBC last night, and it took me into the early hours because I found it so interesting, to comment on a programme that they've aired, and it was the disappearance of Renee McRae. You can get it on iPlayer. It is one of the best produced murder cases where they actually put the cameras into the Scottish courts. It is fantastic. And rather than speculating about cases, which I don't like to see as a psychologist, you can actually hear the evidence. Really, really cool. Yeah, so it's the disappearance of Renee and her son, Andrew McRae, and it's on iPlayer. Really, really good to look at. You're then willing companions of killers, and we know that's Mara Hindley, Moore's murderer. I'll put discussion, we haven't got time for that. Prevarication, self-defense, killing self-defense, although they aren't entirely innocent. Case I dealt with, really, really difficult. I live in Norfolk now, and there was the Martin case where he was a farmer. He kept being burgled. Someone come through the ceiling and he pulled the trigger, a shotgun, and killed them, was convicted of murder. Yeah, convicted of murder. And I dealt with a case where same sort of thing, burglary in Southall in southwest London. The burglars were confronted by the occupants with a cricket bat. Absolutely no problem around that because one of them had a knife. Anyway, they were chased down the path and one of the victims whacked the guy over the head when he was unarmed at his garden gate twice and then started kicking him. I'll say no more about that. Desperate measures, traumatize relatives of abusers. Yeah, so the dad in child abuse cases going after the suspect. Hotheads, seeing red, you know, impetuous killing. Not psychopathic. Narcissists, people that have fallen in love with themselves. Possessive, killed loved ones out of jealousy. Yeah, this is really interesting. Again, this is a Freudism here. A fit of rage, underlying smouldering rage. So mention, and I've put in there, Freud suggested that we listen to this carefully, that we all have the ability to kill, all of us, and he called it Thalantos, and I agree 100% with him. So we now move on to semi-jealous lovers with psychopathic markers, lack of remorse, and then in the way killers, victim simply gets in the way. I'll put Gaskin, that's not me, that's Donald Gaskin. And then in the way, full-on psychopath, cold-hearted murdering. So we now get onto the top end of the scale. Yeah, 12, power-hungry and cornered. Their power is cornered when they can't escape. That might be from a relationship. Inadequate and rageful, and so we go on. And I think in view of the time, right the way through to where people are torturing. You can see that in your own time. Further reading, this is what we've dealt with this evening. I've produced online 101 either courses or talks. Inside the minds of healthcare serial killers, if you want to have a look. I mentioned Catherine Ramsland earlier on. The Shipman Inquiry is free. This is a book which brings, called Snakes in Suits by Robert Hare and someone else, that brings psychopathy into day-to-day business. There's also the Psychology Today. That's a free article you can have a look at. And this sounds egocentric, it's not. This is a case that I reviewed in 1998, and I've been investigating for, well, 23 years now, a lot of that in my own time, and it's come to pass now who is responsible. And this is a programme called West End Girls, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, 2 in Hounslow and 2 in the East End of London. And that programme is fronted by Colin Sutton, myself, and the DCI that brought Stephen Lawrence's killers to justice. Fantastic officer. She was under my command when she was a PC, so I claim that as being a real result. Further reading, and there's other things. So I think what we're going to do now is just stop to take any questions. And I think because there's a lot of us on this evening, I'll take any questions through the chat. Yeah, so that's interesting. Karen Francis is saying that I was married to his cousin. Manuel, how worrying. Was this in Scotland? Yes, it was. So any questions, guys, emanating out of this evening?
Steve, hello, thanks for your chat. I'm really curious to what you think is the reason that Lucy Letby kept those notes, because the detective inspectors who looked into the case said that they actually felt that she left them there to be found. So I'm just curious as to what
that may well be the case. I mean, my take on that is that there is, you probably, if you have been, sadly, if you've been in hospital, there's a handover procedure. I personally think that she was just trying to reduce her culpability in terms of getting caught. And yeah, Ellie has come up with a good thing there. That could, yeah, that's a really good point you make. It could be a trophy, because there's no doubt the research that she did after her murders is reliving that experience. Maybe she had some sort of enjoyment or greater for that. But this idea that people want to get caught is simply not true.
I'm actually talking about the post-it notes, though.
So you're talking about?
I'm actually talking about the post-it notes where she had like,
oh, I see what you mean,
ramblings. Sorry. And like, yeah.
Well, I don't know. I'm not a sort of person that keeps a diary or writes things down. It's quite clear that she did, but again, it's quite curious, isn't it, that that she didn't destroy them afterwards. I don't know why she did that, nor does the judge. No idea at all. Do you think, Joe said this, do you think the 30 deaths at the Manchester Hospital now being investigated regarding Letby's time there will reveal she had started this killing spree earlier? Well, I think that the police and certainly the health authority now have got a public duty to look at that, and the similar sort of cases with what was called with the Savile case, even though this is not a very good analogy, but even though Savile was dead, Lucy Letby will never be tried again. There's no point in that, and they would not. I doubt if the Crown Prosecution Service would go for it again. But I do think that they will have a close look at when she was on. It will start with her HR records, won't it? When was she on duty? What times of the day? When was she on holiday? And I think they will look at a lot of cases. Yeah, I think they will almost certainly do that. And if they don't, the public inquiry will. And then, as you often hear in the press, they might then hand a file to the police. It'd be quite a good idea if there was a neutral police officer from another force actually on that inquiry. I think they would help, but I don't think they will. Very good question here. Yeah, so that's there. Does anyone make anything of the apparent fact that the house she purchased backed onto a graveyard, specifically with direct line of sight, oh God, to an infant memorial garden? I think there would have to be some form of evidence there, but who knows? Who knows? That's terrible, terrible, grim. Yeah, I think what I'm going to do, guys, I'm 10 minutes over. Please, there's just two other things I want to show you, and thank you very much for the positive comments that have come in. And as again, I'm sorry that the material has been not what I hoped. I'd never have to deliver something like this, but I have done. There's just a couple of things I'd like to show you. If you're interested in this, I've got a contract with Fuller's Brewery, would you believe? We're on our third tranche. The next one that we're on the third tranche of dining with the detective. So basically rock up, have one or two beers, we have an interactive experience. We're going to look at suspects who thought they got away. I've created a VR crime scene for you to plan a murder, and then you're going to try and get away with it, and then investigate a real murder case, which is based on my first one. And again, this is a sort of quite a proud moment for me. I've been asked by Bow Street Museum, it's a good night out, this is, to do a gig around Scotland Yard fingerprint masterclass. So there'll be a short history of fingerprints, the science explained. You take your own fingerprints, and then you'll hear about some really cool cases. The answer is, someone's just said here, would I be doing anything in Norfolk? I've got a conversation with Epic Studios in Norwich to do a big one, and hopefully it's going to be myself and Colin Sutton, and see how fingerprints appear in the natural world. And then just finally, it's a big thank you from me. It's been really good working with you. You can see that there is a this is so cheeky of me, there is a QR code there, and there is a handle there, buy me a coffee, True Crime Lab. If you fancy doing that, you can make a donation, and that will allow me to continue the research into some of these cases, and maybe put on some others, but that's entirely up to you. I advertise this as a free gig, but if you want to do that, that would be a delight. And lastly, I will be sending you a copy of the this presentation. It's on YouTube. It has to stay there. We've got copyright on this for obvious reasons. If you want to ask me any questions, please go email me. Be an absolute delight. And I think unless anyone's got any burning questions, that is it. And yeah, that's it from me. Let's just come out so I can see one or two of you. Thanks for different groups that have come along. Dean, it's great seeing you again, my friend, after all these years. I certainly look a lot older than you. Undergrads, carry on your studies with this most fascinating subject, and professionals, if this has been any use to you, that's good. And to all of you, thank you very much for coming along. Have a good bank holiday weekend, and I'm going to go and make my knockoff KFC chicken. That would be good. That'd be good. But thanks once again. Look after yourselves, and remember, we have a great NHS, and these cases are extremely rare. And hopefully, you've got a bit more of an insight into what Lucy Letby was up to. With that, I will wish you a very good night, and to friend that's in Denver and in South Africa, or South Africa's rather the same time, a good afternoon to you. Cheerio, and thanks once again, and look out for my email. See you guys. Bye.